In Tudor England, the crown ruled not only with laws, but with fear. A single misspoken word, a wrong look, or a different belief could seal your death sentence. And not just any death, but one designed to break the soul, to warn those who dared question the order imposed by the throne. Today, we will travel to the heart of that bloody era, where the scaffold was a spectacle, torture a political tool, and death a language of power. Before continuing with the topic, we invite you to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Without further ado, let's begin. In May 1536, Queen Anne Boleyn, second wife of Henry VIII, met her fate in the grim Tower of London. It was an unusual execution. No axe was used, but a sword brought expressly from Calais as an ironic gesture of mercy. Henry wanted her death to appear more dignified, even though the accusations of adultery, incest, and treason lacked solid evidence. And, dressed in a grey gown and a scarlet headdress, knelt calmly. It is said her final words were, "The king has been very good to me." A sepulchral silence filled the tower as the sword fell, separating her head from a trembling body. Some witnesses never slept the same again. Thomas Cromwell, the architect of many of these tragedies, ended up a victim of the very machinery he had helped strengthen. In 1540, after the diplomatic fiasco of the marriage to and of Cleves, he fell from favor. The execution was a bloody farce. The executioner, nervous or inexperienced, needed several blows to finish the job. A letter he wrote from prison reflects his despair. "My only crime was serving my master too well." A cruel end for the man who had controlled the fate of so many. Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, was 67 years old when she was taken to the scaffold in 1541, during the reign of Henry VIII. Her Plantagenet blood made her a threat to the Tudor dynasty. She refused to kneel before the executioner, and when he tried to behead her, Margaret ran across the scaffold, forcing him to chase her and strike her with multiple failed and clumsy blows. The scene was so brutal that even contemporary chroniclers were horrified. "She ran as if she could escape the fate already written for her," wrote one witness. Her death was more a massacre than an execution. Thomas More, humanist, philosopher, and chancellor, was executed in 1535 for refusing to sign the Act of Supremacy, which proclaimed Henry VIII as the head of the Church of England. He clung to his Catholic faith until his last breath. He climbed the scaffold with dignity and declared, "I die the king's good servant, but God's first." His blood, spilled that day, became a symbol of the struggle between conscience and crown. Robert Aske, leader of the Pilgrimage of Grace rebellion, was betrayed by the false promise of pardon. Instead of clemency, he was taken in chains to York, locked in an iron cage, and hung from the city walls until he slowly died of hunger and cold. His death became a living warning. Local chronicles compared him to a martyr, hung between heaven and earth, exposed to the cruelty of men and the indifference of God. Anne Askew, noble Protestant, writer, and poet, was one of the few women tortured in the Tower of London during the reign of Henry VIII. In 1546, she was accused of heresy for her reformist beliefs and for refusing to renounce her faith. She was brutally stretched on the rack until her bones cracked. Her injuries were so severe that she could not stand, and so she was taken to the scaffold in a chair. That same day, she was burned alive at the stake in Smithfield, refusing until the end to betray other Protestant sympathizers. Her words, along with her poems and theological writings, survived her death, turning her into an immortal martyr of the Protestant faith and a lasting symbol of suffering and spiritual resistance in times of religious persecution. Edward Stafford, Duke of Buckingham, was one of the most powerful and wealthy nobles in England during the reign of Henry VIII. A direct descendant of King Edward III, his lineage placed him dangerously close to the throne. In 1521, he was arrested and accused of plotting against the king. Although the evidence was weak, his trial was clearly political, and the sentence inevitable. He was found guilty of treason and condemned to death. On the day of his execution, a massive crowd gathered to witness the tragic end. Many wept as they saw the nobleman fall beneath the executioner's axe. The Venetian ambassador wrote, "He was more loved by the people than by his king." His fall was a brutal warning. Neither royal blood nor noble birth could protect anyone from a monarch determined to eliminate any threat to his power. During the reign of James V of Scotland, although the king had already died in 1542 and the country was ruled by a regency during the minority of Mary Stuart, George Wishart, an influential Scottish Protestant preacher, was condemned to die at the stake for his reformist ideas in 1546. Before his execution, he requested that gunpowder be tied around his neck to avoid a slow death. It was done as he asked. Amid smoke, flames, and a sudden explosion, his life ended before the cold eyes of Cardinal David Beaton, one of his fiercest enemies. His brutal execution stirred popular outrage in Scotland, and it wasn't long before St. Andrew's Castle, where Wishart was executed, was besieged by a group of avengers determined to settle scores. Barnaby Fitzpatrick, a close friend and childhood companion of King Edward VI, managed to survive the upheavals of the Tudor court thanks to his closeness to the monarch. However, his younger brother, Thomas Fitzpatrick, was not so fortunate. He was accused of conspiracy due to some ambiguous letters that raised suspicion in an environment where political paranoia was lethal. He was denied a trial. He was summarily executed. In his diary, Edward VI coldly wrote, "Today a young noble died for the shadow of some words." In Tudor times, a mere suspicion could seal a death sentence. John Fischer, Bishop of Rochester, was executed in 1535 for refusing to accept Henry VIII's divorce and the break with the Catholic Church. He was a frail and sickly old man, but his faith remained unshaken until the end. He refused to acknowledge the king's supremacy over the church and was imprisoned in the Tower of London. On June 22, he was beheaded for treason. His head was publicly displayed on London Bridge as a warning to those who dared to defy the monarch. However, his bravery and serenity in the face of death made him a figure of inspiration for both Catholics and some Protestants. It is said that before dying he uttered these words, "May my blood cleanse this land of its madness." Lady Jane Grey, known as the 9 Days Queen, was a tragic piece in the power game of others. A victim of her family's ambition and the Protestant nobility, she was proclaimed queen after the death of Edward VI in a desperate attempt to prevent the rise of the Catholic Mary Tudor. However, her reign was brief. Just 9 days later, Mary I took the throne. Jane was imprisoned in the Tower of London and condemned for high treason. She was only 16 years old. From her cell window, she witnessed a heartbreaking scene, the headless body of her young husband, Guildford Dudley, being carried away after his execution. Shortly after, she walked calmly toward the scaffold, holding a small prayer book in her hands. She approached the block with trembling steps. Upon arrival, she appeared disoriented, unsure where to place her head. For a moment, silence reigned. Finally, an assistant to the executioner gently approached and showed her the place. Jane obeyed silently, with a soul-crushing calmness. That moment, a confused and brave young noblewoman surrendering to a fate imposed by others, was etched in history as one of the saddest and most heartbreaking acts of the Tudor era. Thomas Cranmer, the first Protestant Archbishop of Canterbury and a key figure in the English Reformation, was arrested after the restoration of Catholicism under the reign of Queen Mary I. During his imprisonment, he recanted his Protestant faith in an attempt to avoid execution. However, upon being taken to the stake on March 21, 1556, he shocked everyone by publicly retracting his renunciation. In front of the crowd, he declared that his repentance had been forced and false. In an act of atonement, he extended his right hand, the one that had signed the recantation, and held it in the fire, letting it burn first. He died in the flames, crying out loudly, "This unworthy hand." It was a dramatic and harrowing end for a man who had deeply influenced the religious history of England. Hugh Latimer and Nicholas Ridley were executed together at the stake on October 16, 1555, by order of Queen Mary I of England as part of her violent persecution of Protestants. Both men, former bishops and key figures in the English Reformation, were declared heretics. The execution took place in Oxford. The fire was slow to ignite properly, causing an especially prolonged and painful death, particularly for Ridley. The horror of the scene and the composure of the condemned deeply impacted those who witnessed the act, turning them into martyrs in the eyes of English reformers. Thomas Howard was on the verge of execution on the same day King Henry VIII died, in January 1547. He had been accused of treason for his involvement in political intrigues and for bearing the royal coat of arms without permission. He had been sentenced to death and taken to the Tower of London. The executioner had already raised the axe on the scaffold when, suddenly, the news arrived: the king had died. According to the law, upon the death of the monarch, all pending death sentences were automatically suspended. The execution was cancelled at the last moment, and Norfolk was returned to his cell. It is said the executioner trembled for hours afterward, shaken by how close he had come to shedding blood under an authority that no longer existed. Elizabeth Barton, known as the Nun of Kent, gained fame in the England of Henry VIII by claiming that God spoke to her in dreams and visions. Her prophecies, deeply religious in tone, captured the attention of both commoners and nobles alike. Among her boldest declarations, she predicted that the king would die if he dared to marry Anne Boleyn. These words, considered dangerous in a time of religious and political tension, sealed her fate. She was arrested, accused of treason, and executed in 1534 as a warning to those who dared challenge the authority of the monarch. Her head was publicly displayed on a spike on London Bridge, a symbol of divine punishment and the king's absolute power. Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, poet, courtier, and nobleman of the English Renaissance, was executed in 1547 on charges of treason for allegedly aspiring to the throne. He was a man of letters, too free in thought, and feared for both his lineage and wit. His poetic style, innovative and melancholic, was as unsettling as his surname. While awaiting his fate in the Tower of London, he wrote with bitter lucidity, "Words do not redeem when power is afraid." His death not only silenced one of the brightest voices of his time but also marked the prelude to the end of Henry VIII's reign. William Tinddale was an English scholar and reformer who dedicated his life to translating the Bible into English so that anyone, regardless of social status, could read and understand it. This work was considered heretical by the Catholic Church and the English authorities of the time. In 1536, he was arrested, convicted of heresy, and executed in the Netherlands. He was strangled and then his body was burned at the stake. His final words were a cry to the heavens, "O Lord, open the King of England's eyes." Ironically, just a few years later, the publication of an English Bible was authorized, the King James Bible, largely based on Tyndale's work. Mark Smeaton, a talented musician at the court of Henry VIII, was accused of having been Anne Boleyn's lover. Without noble blood or power to defend himself, he was the perfect target. Under brutal torture, he confessed to what likely never happened. He was convicted of treason and executed in the cruelest way, hanged, eviscerated, and quartered in public. His body was left unrecognizable. Many believe he never even touched the Queen. His only mistake was being in the wrong place, at the wrong court. Thank you for staying with us until the end of the video. Give us a like and subscribe for more historical content.